Hey everybody, this is Kodak here, and welcome to the first episode of a series I am calling Playing Around. This series, rather than focusing on whether something is good or bad the way the 7 Deadly Sins did, instead looks at the ups and downs of various card game mechanics. It's really kind of impossible to tell whether a mechanic is good or not. Like with most things, the truth about something is often a mixture of good and bad, and things that might seem like a good idea on the surface might carry with them many unforeseen consequences. So, to introduce this concept, let's take a look at one of the most common sights in many popular card games, resource cards. Now, of course, any horribly pompous trading card game player will tell you that technically, everything's a resource. Your hand is a resource, your deck is a resource, your discard pile is a resource, your life points are a resource, even the very chair in which you sit can be a resource to use on the people who won't shut up about resources. But when we're talking about resource cards, we mean cards used in the game for the specific purpose of enabling the other cards in that game, usually by contributing to some sort of cost, often to bring the card into play in the first place. The best known example of this would be the lands in Magic the Gathering, which produce one colored mana per turn that are used to pay for the matching symbols on the other cards. A lot of card games use a similar system, such as Force of Will's Mana Stones, Bleach's Disciplines, and One Piece's Dawn cards. Of course, there are also the energy cards of Pokemon, which, rather than letting you play cards, enable those cards to perform actions. There are also games that, rather than having dedicated resource cards, let you use any card in your hand as one, such as with Duel Masters, World of Warcraft, and Dragon Ball. Whatever their form, resource cards serve primarily the same purpose: to apply a slope and tempo to a game's progression. By putting a hard limit on player resources, usually by only allowing them to put one of these resource cards into play at a time, it gives the game time to build and ramp up, rather than having both players simply dump all of their power cards all at once. With resource cards acting as a slow release valve, games can develop more natural twists and turns where difficult decisions must be made, and maintaining tempo is an important skill to learn. Resource cards are also often diverse, giving a game a natural jumping-off point to attribute separation meant to create a more vibrant playscape. Of course, resource cards have their own problems as well. Those that get played from the hand impose an automatic -1 to hand size every single turn, since they must be played to do other things, and many dedicated resource cards come across as kinda bland, as all they do is enable other cards to function. And then, of course, there are games with no resource cards at all. Games like Digimon, Battle Spirits, practically every game by Bushiroad, Hearthstone, and Yu-Gi-Oh! But don't let those limitations fool you. Resource cards are not a problem that needs solving. Otherwise, Pokemon and Magic would have been kicked off of their high horse years ago. Like I said before about the truth of most things, it's complicated. So first, let's break down the most common types of resource cards. Resource cards have two major dimensions they operate on: dedicated versus any, and sturdy versus volatile. Dedicated resource cards are cards that exist only as resource cards, like the aforementioned land and energy cards, while any card as resource systems can use any of the cards in your hand put down as a resource at the cost of being unable to play that card again later. Dedicated resource cards generally have a lot of downsides. Since their only purpose is to pay the costs of other cards, they are often unexciting on their own, cluttering hands and decks and being a boring thing to draw on an important turn. Any card as resource, on the other hand, lets every card in the deck pull double duty, letting a player pack more important cards into their deck so that every draw can be a game changer. But again, this isn't a magical cure-all to dedicated resource cards. While those upsides are nice, the obvious downside is that you have to choose which cards you will forego playing later to add to your resource row now, making the step a longer and more agonizing one than it probably needs to be. That, and dedicated resource cards have a number of interesting tools at their disposal that any card as resource games simply lack. More on those later. The other major dimension is whether the resource cards are sturdy or volatile. Sturdy resource cards are pretty simple. Once they enter play, they're staying put, giving their benefits constantly and requiring some sort of special interaction to go away, such as a dedicated card effect. Land cards, mana stones, and disciplines are sturdy resource cards. Volatile resource cards are a little more difficult to explain. These resource cards are less reliable than sturdy resource cards and often leave play as a part of normal gameplay. The enter and gauge cards of We Cross and Buddy Fight are sent to the discard pile when they are used to pay for costs, and energy cards are connected to the Pokemon they are giving their power to, so when that Pokemon leaves the field, it takes their energy cards with them. These sorts of cards require more careful timing and investment than their sturdy counterparts. Of course, you also have cards that stick their thumbs in both pies. Versus System and World of Warcraft have any card as resource, but also have event and quest cards, dedicated resource cards that get some kind of bonus when they get used, with the downside being that they are dedicated resource cards in an any card as resource game. On the other spectrum, we have One Piece's Dawn cards, which are a sturdy resource that some card effects will shuffle back into the Dawn deck as a form of ability payment. However, this isn't a benefit of the Dawn cards themselves, and I personally don't like how Dawn is used as a mechanic, but this isn't the One Piece review, so moving on! So you remember I talked about how dedicated resource cards actually have some pretty interesting tricks at their disposal despite all of their downsides. How do they do this? Well, I admit I might have already tipped my hand when I talked about locations and quests. You see, even from the beginning, Magic and Pokemon understood how to make the resource cards work, with special resource cards. Magic had these in the first sets with the dual lands, and Pokemon with double colorless energy. Later sets would see infamous cards like Library of Alexandria, Rainbow Energy, Bazaar of Baghdad, Darkness and Metal Energy, Tolarian Academy, Call Energy, Forest Dryads, Plasma Energy, the Fetch Lands, Strong Energy, the list goes on. These special resources are cards that are only allowed in a deck in limited quantity compared to the normally unlimited basic resources, but their unique positions as dedicated resources lets them play around in ways that any card as resource usually cannot. These can not only provide the resources needed to activate other cards, but they can have splashy on-play effects, additional benefits that can be used repeatedly, or even bonus resources, usually with an offset such as a one-turn delay, play restrictions, or other penalties such as a life cost. But it doesn't take much to make these special resources be amazing. Heck, even something as simple as giving them the ability to be discarded to draw another card proved a game-changing effect for Magic the Gathering. Another handy thing? Draft. Dedicated, basic resource cards help relax the needs of a drafting scene since they can take the place of a large amount of the deck and can be adjusted up or down depending on how well somebody's draft goes. So, it kinda goes without saying, if you plan on using dedicated resource cards, be ready to play around with them a bit, or else they get kinda dry. Now, there have also been a number of ways resource cards have been used outside of the use one to pay one cost function. The Mega Man card game uses an any card as resource system that fills a power row, where your resource row is a threshold that you have to meet to play certain cards. Flesh and Blood has a system where all of your cards have different resource values leveraged against the card's power, letting each skill exist in up to 3 forms. Still others, like Game Me No Like, use the stacks accumulated through normal play as their resources. Regarding the problem of going -1 to hand every turn to maintain a resource system, there are 2 common solutions: charge and draw systems and energy decks. Charge and draw systems let you immediately draw a fresh card after playing a resource, increasing card flow as an added benefit, while cards with separate resource decks let you play resources without depleting the hand. Better draw power in general seems to be an important factor in games with resource card systems. But what about games that don't use resource cards? Even though I said resource cards aren't a problem that needs solving, that hasn't stopped people from trying. The thing is, if a game does not use resource cards, it still needs a way to temper its progression. Probably the most famous game to lack resource cards is Yu-Gi-Oh! And that game barely remembers what the term turn 4 means because with how insane its lack of temperance is. There is a system that you can only perform 1 normal summon of a monster each turn, but there are so many ways to get around that limitation in the modern format that it doesn't even matter anymore. Literally, the only thing stopping progression in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is the number of cards in your hand. Now, the most common way designers eliminate a resource card system is to simply replace it with something else. Probably most famously the mana system in Hearthstone, where your available mana simply ticks up once each turn to a maximum of 10, and I'm gonna be honest, this really only works because it's digital. The thing about these sorts of systems is that they are a mindless thing that happens in the background, something that can be easily forgotten or missed by someone too caught up in the action of the game. Wait, is it turn 4 or turn 5? The thing about resource cards is that they are a nice, hard, tactile experience where you have to make the grand gesture of moving the card into play. It's what I call a self-tracking feature, something that is easy to maintain because of the work needed to operate it. Even a stack of cards you have to flip over each turn makes for a better system than trying to keep it in your head. Some other cardless resource mechanics include the cores from Battle Spirits. These work similarly to the shield cards and any card as resource systems in that, rather than using cards, resources are these little crystals that you juggle between multiple locations, including when you take damage. It might be a bit of a grand gesture to move your spent cores all the way across the field, but I guess it's to prevent them from mixing with your fresh cores. But at the start of the turn, you slide the cores back across the table and add another from the central pool. Be careful not to let these extra components get out of control though, or else you get Keyforge again. Remember sin number 6. The Digimon card game uses a sliding resource mechanic, where players essentially play tug of war on the resources you have. In this case, playing a powerful card can actually give your opponent resources rather than taking resources away from you. There are still more methods to handle this: discard, milling, level up, life point allocation, size limits, dice rolls, action points, and even just good old-fashioned money lying around. There are dozens of ways that games seek to temper their progression, and it might be a good idea to look at alternatives to what so many games seem to be holding aloft like some sort of panacea. There is no perfect way to handle game temperance across all games. Like the saying goes, there is no perfect pizza sauce, only perfect pizza sauces. At least I think that's how it goes. But the point is that not every method works for every game, and switching the system around might help the other parts of your machine work a whole lot better. Keep these things in mind, and you too can build a better card game. Join us next time on Playing Around. Also, a big thanks to all of my patrons, specifically Cliclo, Weird Warp, Danny, Vaughn, and Johnny D2, who joined in at the $10 or higher level. Just $1 a month is enough to get you access to our Discord server, where we just opened up a game room. If you want to hook up with some people to play some tabletop simulator games, including demos and test runs, you can join in on that for as little as $1 per month. Thanks again, and until next time, this is Kodak signing off. Oh, wait, it's pasta sauce, not pizza sauce. There's no perfect pasta sauce, only perfect pasta sauces. That's the phrase. I thought something seemed weird.